As summer turns to autumn, albums such as Nick Drake's 5 Leaves Left, Joni Mitchell's Blue, or the Beatles' Rubber Soul fit the change of the season perfectly and can provide all the melancholic comfort you need. But there's one album which I think encapsulates the vibe perfectly, but without bringing you down. And that's this, the Zombies Odessey and Oracle. Thanks to its appearance on lists over the past 30 years of the best albums of all time, Odessey and Oracle has gained both the reputation and sales it was cruelly denied on its initial release back in 1968. As well as enchanting almost everyone who's heard it, it's inspired many a modern musician and has been cited as a masterclass in songwriting. I first came across this album when I found an original Polish copy in a junk shop in Prague 30 years ago. And although I've since owned original UK mono and stereo vinyl copies and on CD, it's an album which I think sounds great across every format. Unlike a lot of groups around in the early part of the 60s, the Zombies were well educated and had a decent knowledge of classical music. Their image was clean-cut and studious looking, as they preferred their music rather than their image to do the talking. Signed by Decca in early 1964, their debut single, She's Not There, became their first and biggest hit, reaching number 12 in the UK and number 2 in the US in the summer of that year. Although they went on to release a further 9 singles for Decca, plus an EP and an album, they never managed to match the success of that first single. By mid-1967, Decca, who'd been more than patient with them, decided enough was enough and let them go. A shame because the Zombies would have fitted perfectly on their newly launched Duram label alongside the Moody Blues. But a new deal wasn't far away, and in June they signed an exclusive deal with CBS Records, which gave them, among other things, something Decca never afforded them: complete artistic control. So on June 1st, 1967, with a new set of songs written and meticulously rehearsed, the Zombies entered Abbey Road Studios to record Odessey and Oracle, and in doing so became the first non-EMI group to record in that place. That day also saw the release of the Sgt. Pepper album, but unlike the Beatles, who were given all the time they needed in the studio, the Zombies were bound by the studio's standard 3-hour morning and afternoon session rules, so they had to work fast and efficiently. But despite all their careful rehearsing and planning, there was something they found in the studio that day that would take the recordings they made there to a different level, and it's something which I think defines this album. For anyone who's been lucky enough to see a mellotron in action, it's hard not to be impressed. During a visit to IBC Studios in London on August 9, 1965, John Lennon witnessed such a demonstration and was so impressed he ordered one on the spot and installed it in his attic studio. The Beatles most famously used the mellotron on Strawberry Fields Forever, where Paul McCartney can be heard playing it on the song's introduction. They also employed it during the Magical Mystery Tour sessions on the song Flying. However, the Mark II mellotron which the Zombies came across at Abbey Road that day was not John's, as his had never left his house. This was one EMI had hired from Mellotron's London office. The mellotron is an incredible instrument. It's basically a keyboard which plays back pre-recorded sounds of an orchestra and other instruments, like a modern-day sampler, only using 1/4-inch magnetic tape. Every key has its own 8-second length of pre-recorded tape, which plays as each key is pressed down. When the key is released, the tape quickly rewinds back to its starting point. We'll be looking at the mellotron in detail in next week's video, when I visit one of the finest collections of mellotrons in the world, so make sure you're subscribed because that's something you won't want to miss. As well as using the same mellotron the Beatles had used, the Zombies also had the chance to use the same Studer J37 1-inch 4-track tape recorder Sgt. Pepper had been recorded on. This meant that they also benefited from the innovative techniques the studio had used on that album. So now, let's go through this album track by track and find out the stories behind each one of its unskippable tracks. Rod Argent was a big fan of Brian Wilson, and like many other musicians of that period, had been inspired and stimulated by Pet sounds, in particular its harmonic bass lines, which went against the tradition of following the root of the chord. And it's such a bass line which is at the heart of this album's opening track. Care of Cell 44 had started off life as an ordinary love song, but Argent wanted to find a different perspective. He decided to write it in the form of a letter to someone in prison who is excited that they're coming home to resume their lives together. Not exactly standard fare for a pop song in 1968, and unsurprisingly, it flopped when released as the second single from the album in November 1967. Now, there are two different mixes of this track. The mono mix, which appeared on the single and the UK mono pressing of the album, is an edited version of the stereo mix, which is 45 seconds longer. So if you have a mono CD where this track lasts 3 minutes and 55 seconds, it's not the original mono single mix and is either a fold down or an alternative version. The summer is here at last. A Rose for Emily is the title of a 1930 short story written by William Faulkner about a reclusive southern woman who lives in a large southern-style home after her father's death. Although Rod Argent's song lifted the title of the story for the second track on the album, he confesses that the song has little in common with Faulkner's story. It does, however, tell the sad story of an old woman who lived her life without ever finding love, and now the only thing which gives her life meaning is her prized roses. As with most tracks on this album, the backing vocals are supreme and on par with the Beatles and even the Beach Boys. A cello and mellotron part were recorded for this track, but were sadly left out of the final mix. A number of songs on this album follow a similar pattern and style, a dark, moody verse juxtaposed with a bright and breezy chorus, and the album's next track is one of those. Built around a beautiful descending guitar part, Maybe After He's Gone breaks out from a despairing verse into a soaring chorus, with a bridge that momentarily takes the mood of the song in a completely different direction, before returning to loneliness and forlorn hope. This track is one of three which was recorded not at Abbey Road, but at Olympic Studios in Barnes, West London. These tracks have a slightly different vibe to those done at Abbey Road. Beechwood Park took its title from the name of a private girls' school near St Albans, where Chris White used to live. However, rather than being flattered by someone writing a song about it, the Beechwood Park School wrote a letter of complaint to the Zombies, angry that their name had, in their eyes, been demeaned by a pop song. Inspired by the record that was everywhere in the summer of 1967, Procol Harum's Whiter Shade of Pale, Beechwood Park was another of the tracks recorded at Olympic. The mono mix of this track is a touch longer than the stereo mix, as the final organ chord extends for just a second or two longer in mono. Like many Zombies songs, Brief Candles is a song about rejection. Chris White took its title from a 1930 collection of 3 short stories and a novella by Aldous Huxley. This is one of my favourite tracks on the album, and another which follows the pattern of a sad and bleak verse, which explodes into an exuberant chorus, made even more enjoyable by the unique sound of the mellotron. The mellotron's flute and string sounds feature prominently on the album's final track on side 1. Like some other tracks on this album, Hung Up on a Dream takes its theme from the short-lived Summer of Love. Written fairly quickly, the song is perhaps the album's most mellotron-heavy track, drawing heavily on its flutes and string sounds. The mellotron takes center stage again on the first track on side 2 of the vinyl. Changes was a satirical comment on the commercialization of The Summer of Love and how quickly it all went sour. It was also the first Zombies song to feature vocal contributions by drummer Hugh Grundy and guitarist Paul Atkinson. Recorded right at the end of a session in Studio 3 at Abbey Road, Chris White swears he can hear a piano being moved around by studio technicians. Let me know if you can too. It's followed by another track recorded at Olympic, the harpsichord-led I Want Her, She Wants Me. Again, it's a vocal tour de force, and probably the most straightforward pop song on the album. Like the Carpenters' We've Only Just Begun, This Will Be Our Year has over the years become a popular song at weddings. Compared to some of the other tracks, it's a bit of a lightweight, and for me it's just a catchy and charming late 60s pop song. The same, however, cannot be said for the next track. Fought between July and November 1916, the Battle of the Somme was one of, if not the, major battle of the First World War. 57,000 British casualties were reported on the first day of the offensive, one of whom was Chris White's uncle. The song's original title was Western Front 1916, but thinking they knew better, the record company changed it to 1914. Recorded at Abbey Road in a single take on July the 20th, 1967, it's a remarkably emotional song, and Argent's pump organ accompaniment gives it a real authenticity not even the mellotron could have matched. Although clearly the most uncommercial song on the album, the band's US label Date released this track as the second single from the album, in the misguided belief that it would resonate with a young audience opposed to the Vietnam War, which of course it didn't. Friends of Mine, backed with Beechwood Park, was chosen by CBS Records UK as the lead single off the album. Released on September the 22nd, 1967, it flopped as a single, but is a delightful album track, written by Chris White on his guitar about his friends.
They are friends of mine, they are friends of mine, and they've got something it's so hard to find. They are friends of mine, they are friends of mine, and they've got something you don't often find.
One of the couples mentioned in the song are June and Duffy. Duffy was the talented and well-known 60s photographer Brian Duffy and his wife June. If you know the identities of any of the other couples in the song, do let me and everyone else know in the comments. The final track on the album was the final track to be recorded. Although the most successful single of their career, the recording session for it proved to be less than harmonious. There was tension between its writer Rod Argent and vocalist Colin Bluntstone, as Argent wanted it sung in a certain way, which was contrary to Bluntstone's approach. But instead of doing a George Harrison and walking out, Bluntstone backed down and sang the vocal as Argent wanted it to be done. Despite going to number 1 on the Cashbox chart in the US, it inexplicably failed to make the UK chart at all, but as a result of being featured in TV and films over the years, has become their signature song. The album was initially mixed into mono only, but as mono was by 1968 virtually a dead format, in the US especially, CBS demanded a stereo mix be done, which the Zombies had to do at their own expense. Odessey and Oracle was released in the UK on the 19th of April 1968 in both mono and stereo. But a mistake made by the album cover designer Terry Quirk meant that the word Odyssey is misspelt on the cover. A fact which was at the time covered up by the group by telling the press that it was intentional. It was released 2 months later in the States on Columbia's subsidiary label Date, but only after CBS staff producer Al Cooper had convinced label boss Clive Davis to release it after randomly picking up a copy on a trip to London. Despite receiving polite reviews from the contemporary music press in both countries, the album sold poorly, but is seen today as essential in anyone's album collection. I ordered a copy from Amazon last week, and this turned up. It's a decent 180-gram stereo reissue on the Repertoire label, dated 2013, which cost just under €33 or $35. If you'd like to order a copy for yourself, I'll put a link in the description. Beginning from the album's 40th anniversary in 2008, the Zombies played the album on stage all around the world. I had tickets to see them here in Austria back in 2019, but unfortunately the pandemic took care of that. Sadly, Rod Argent's stroke in July this year has put an end to any further performances, but we wish him well and thank him for all the enjoyment he's given us over the years. Odessey and Oracle has touched so many people's lives over the past 50 years, and I think it will for many more. Let us know your feelings about this album and your memories of it in the comments. Maybe Mr. Argent will be reading them. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll join me again next week for our Mellotron special. In the meantime, why not take a look at 10 of my favourite British albums of the 1960s, which of course includes this one. But that's all for this time, so I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.